Go ahead.
No, okay.
Okay. So I'll figure this thing out. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Keisha getting prepared here for our actual exciting special guest for today, who is going to be Joel DeJean. But before we bring Joel up, I want to go through a couple of extraordinary developments that are really proving exactly what Helga and Lyndon LaRouche have led the fight for the past several decades. Should we say, yeah, a lot of decades now. Just in terms of getting the United States to join with the Belt and Road New Silk Road Initiative. That's a little bit more of a recent proposal that came out, if people remember, back in 2013. We published this pamphlet, this beautiful pamphlet that we started circulating across the country and really across the world. And if you can't read the title there, it says, United States joins the New Silk Road, a Hamiltonian vision for an economic renaissance. And I have to say, with the recent developments, we have entered into that new paradigm and the potential for that economic renaissance. There are four developments I want to tell you about that happened over the past few weeks, and I'm going to have Mike put them on the board here on the screen so you can see, and then I'll go through these, highlight these, and then also highlight a few of the statements and quotes that came out from officials surrounding it. It's okay, I can see. So the first thing that happened on June 22nd is that, which was just a few days ago, President Trump met with the top foreign policy official, Yang Jiechi, and during this meeting, where the Yang Jiechi is the lead counsel for China, a top policy official who was in the United States. He met with Rex Tillerson and others. But the key thing that came out of this is that President Trump said that the United States is willing to cooperate on projects relating to the Belt and Road Initiative. And I'll go through the importance of this. Actually, this was developed even further in an article that came out both in Xinhua, in the Chinese publication, and also in Bloomberg News. And during that, there were many other statements that indicated the intention coming from, first, the meeting that President Trump had with Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago back in April, and then also the fact that we sent a representative, Matthew Hardinger, to the Belt and Road Summit on May 15th and 16th. 14th and 15th. And the next thing that happened within this past few days, on June 21st, there was the 9th U.S.-China CEO and former senior officials dialogue. And this dialogue was co-sponsored by the U.S. Chamber of Congress and the Center for International Economic Exchanges. I'll go through a couple of the highlights of that in a few moments. What we can see, both sides at this conference agreed that the two countries can engage in full cooperation under the Belt and Road initiatives and through a number of other means. And they're discussing holding a joint conference in China in about 12 months. The third thing that took place, event that took place, was in San Francisco, California, and this conference was titled 2017 U.S.-China Cooperation, 2017 U.S.-China Transportation Cooperation Forum. There were about 200 Chinese and American government officials and infrastructure companies represented there. And I'll just state really quickly here some of the developments that came out of that forum. Just give me a second here. Um, Here we are. So during this forum, the Chinese Consul General to San Francisco, Luo Lingquan, made the following statement. He said, quote, China and the U.S. cooperation on the infrastructure front is poised to become the new highlight in the trade engagement between the two countries. California, along with its neighboring states, has been especially close trade relations with China. The import and export volume between this region and China has mounted to more than $201 billion in 2016. You also had at that same conference a statement from the Deputy Secretary of Transportation at California State Transportation Agency. His name is Chad Edison. And he says, quote, the One Belt, One Road initiative was conceived in China, but it provides a global platform for economic development for all countries participating. So finish with the final conference that took place, which was in Detroit, Michigan. This was the speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, Brian Kelly, speaking to 3,000 participants. And he said of trade, it's a traditional win-win situation. The other speaker that was there was the head of the company Alibaba, and he says that he said that if you miss China, you miss the future, which is absolutely right. And more people are starting to come to understand that if you miss China, you miss the future. So it's being made very clear right now that the American people don't want to miss the future, and they know exactly how important it is for the United States to actually join with this new paradigm and the future orientation that's now being set into motion, with realizing that the United States is now moving toward taking up the vision outlined by Helga and Lyndon LaRouche and our organization in this remarkable pamphlet here. And so the other aspect of this is what we're seeing right now in terms of, first of all, let me just say, in response to those four major developments that took place, Helga LaRouche, who, as for those who may not be familiar, she is known in China as the Silk Road Lady. She has been very prominent in working with China and nations around the world, particularly in Japan and China and in Asian countries, to get the United States and Europe to join with this new paradigm with the economic development of cooperation among nations as a refuting of the policy toward regime change and war. And she was recently in Beijing for about 2 weeks for the conference in Beijing that the representative from the United States, Pottinger, attended. And during that time, we've gone through this in many other discussions and classes. Helga herself was invited to speak at many of the other sideline meetings during the Belt and Road Summit, and addressed a number of conferences, a number of interviews that she did in China as well while being there. But she was very optimistic to find out about these developments. As a matter of fact, I don't know what the details around this meeting are, but Mrs. LaRouche is now in Germany as we speak, actually addressing a meeting on the Belt and Road Initiative. So our organization is front and center in this fight and have been for a very long time. And her remarks on these developments was quite optimistic. And she said that she reminded people that it was only 3 years ago that the initiative for the U.S. to join the New Silk Road was put forth in this pamphlet that I just showed you. And she said that this initiative has gained great prominence. Uh, she, she also stated that the United States, that people should be totally optimistic, and made the point that ideas matter, ideas shape history. And this is very important because I want to show you a couple of things, a couple of pictures here from the organizing that's taking place in Manhattan, because this is the center of ideas for our organization in the United States that's propagating throughout the entire country and really throughout the world. And LaRouche started his Manhattan project with a real classical mission for restoring a great order and a new vision for mankind that has to start with unifying the United States. And so what we've been doing is actually getting a explosive response from the population to our ideas. We're getting some of you who are in here, you met the LaRouche organization because either you saw us online, or a friend brought you here, or you met us because you saw us at a table doing a book table out on the streets. And so this is what they're doing here. You'll see some of our signs here. I'll go through a couple of them in a few moments. But we're getting table deployments within the New York area, resulting in the ranges of $500 to $1,000 plus squads right now. And people are coming up to the table not because we represent a side, or we're going along with the populist party politics, or rah-rah Republicans, rah-rah Democrats. We're not doing that. We're actually giving people a mission, giving them a vision for the only way that we're going to actually get out of the financial and economic collapse that's devastated this country, is that people have to understand the power of ideas and the fact that LaRouche has laid out a very clear plan for how to get out of this crisis. And he put that in what he called his 4 laws to save the United States. And actually what Joel is going to go through soon are a representation of the highest concept of those 4 laws. And we'll get to that in a few moments. But I'll just go through, why don't we just go through a couple of these slides here. You can see, revive the American system. What you have there is Lincoln, Trump, and President Trump, and Abraham Lincoln, President Trump, and Lyndon LaRouche. And because this is what we're fighting for right now. What we're seeing, what we're taking out on the streets, this is what people are getting in the streets of Manhattan, what we've been getting out here. American-Chinese cooperation for the New Silk Road, a common destiny for mankind. And this is our latest publication for the Hamiltonian newsletter that we get out on the streets every day. And people are really seeing that if you want to actually know what we're up against right now in the fight against the enemies of progress and the fight against those who want to run an all-out coup against the President of the United States right now, the real threat to their financial existence, to the existence of this British Empire, and the policy that has been put forth to stop creativity, to stop human progress, is the idea of what scares them the most. The idea that the United States would actually join and cooperate with China. The idea that we can actually become partners in the development of the planet, the world, and put a stop to this war drive, put a stop to this threat of annihilation. The same thing goes with Russia. Why do you think this whole big operation about Russia, Russian hacking, anti-Russia, these sanctions put on Russia? Look, even the Congress made clear themselves that they're going to show Trump that he can't come in and reverse the policies that they have put in place, going back to Obama, of putting sanctions on Russia because we have to show Russia who's boss. Well, while you're trying to show Russia who's boss, well, guess what's happening? You're not stopping terrorism. You're continuing to go along with this policy of regime change and war. And so what we're getting is the American people are standing up against this right now, of all different backgrounds, walks of life, nationality. I mean, remember, I'm not talking about this response coming from Texas, where you have all Trump-gate Republicans here. I'm talking about this response. The Republicans in Texas could actually learn something from what these guys are doing in New York, because they're not fighting here, the Republicans. They're not actually seeing that this is bigger than just a party fight. But we are taking it to the highest level, because it is back to this question of a common destiny for mankind. And you really see, let's show a couple more of these pictures here. That's another one that you have in Manhattan. And I mean, like I said, the people who are coming up are blue collar workers, Democrats going back to the FDR, JFK tradition, Republicans, independents, everybody is saying, what is happening to our country right now? Why is it that we're so focused on McCarthyite FBI operations that are running rampant to confuse, and the media run operations against the population to lie and to push a policy calling for the assassination of a president right now? I mean, it's all over the place, more and more. And it's completely insane, because the American people are looking at the conditions economically. New York, I can't even go through what's going on right now. I will encourage people. First of all, we had a really good presentation given last night on our website. It's every week on Fridays we do a weekly webcast, and Paul Gallagher, EIR director, economics director, and then also Diane Sayer, my colleague on the policy committee, gave a presentation with Matt Ogden on the economic breakdown conditions just devastating the United States. And I'll just say, I mean, when he said Paul Gallagher was going through the breakdown of the locks and dams, and then one of the bridges that every single freight line runs over, every single passenger and freight train runs over, that is now at the point of complete disintegration, meaning that what happens is that as ships go under the opening of where these trains go across, the opening opens up so the ships can go under, and then it closes back down and trains go across here all the time. Anyway, so make a long story short, because you should listen to it, he understands it better. It just really shocked me that sometimes the tracks don't line back up appropriately. Most of the time, very, very often, the tracks don't line back up exactly as they should, and so you have to have you have to have people go on the tracks and hammer it together and hammer it and fix it. Yes. Oh my God. Sledgehammers. And so they say, well, if they can't get it lined back up and there's a derailment and the trains go off the track or something, and you would have something like 10% of the entire GDP of the United States that would vanish like that. I mean, this is what we're talking about right here, and we're talking about stupid stuff. If you let Hollywood and allow for Hollywood and the popular opinion and the crazy media to tell you what we should be thinking right now and how we should be responding to this moment, then you are not morally fit to actually have a nation. I mean, I'm going to say Benjamin Franklin said, "I give you a nation if you can keep it. Give you a republic if you can keep it." Well, this is how we're going to keep it, exactly with this qualified mission of meeting this common destiny of mankind, rebuilding our country, making LaRouche's four laws law. That Glass-Steagall, a national credit system, a national bank system, and a commitment toward a future perspective for a science driver. And that's what we're going to get into in a minute. But how do you actually really identify with the mission at hand? What is required in the mind to be able to not just see this as just policy or some abstract fight, but that this is the question of, can the American people rise to the level of a truly human identity? Can we really see the future from the standpoint of acting for the common destiny of mankind, acting for the future? And this is where what we're doing right now in Manhattan, and I want to close with this because I think this is really the concept that we have to have around the question of the beauty of and power of ideas, exemplified by the beauty and power of great classical musical composition. And one of the things that's really inspiring and grabbing the attention of the numbers of people that are coming up to our table is not that we have just the signs, but what is really underlying these signs, what's behind it. And one, it's the fact that LaRouche has made a commitment in this organization that we will commit this nation to the revival of great classical art, classical poetry, classical music. And in the next week, we have an extraordinary event that will be taking place that's going to transform anybody who gets there, who gets a whiff of this, which is the birthday celebration of Sylvia Oden Lee. And Sylvia would have turned 100 years old in June 29. She died back in some years back in 2003. And Sylvia was the first African-American female vocal coach and classical vocal coach and master pianist who trained leading vocalists that anybody you know of in the classical scene, Kathleen Battle, Jesse Norman, the list goes on to enormous amounts of people from all over the world, not just here in the United States. And she first played at the Manhattan and also worked with people who sang at Carnegie Hall. And so we're going to be having a concert in her honor. This is going to be actually sponsored by this concert is being sponsored by the Foundation for Revival of Classical Culture, and the Schiller Institute is going to be participating and singing. And I look forward to having an opportunity to attend. And this is going to be held at Carnegie Hall. And so, but you really have a sense that this is a person who had she actually, every life that she touched, she was able to transform, even if you hadn't met her before. If you actually got a sense of her work, you were able to recognize that she wasn't just teaching people about music, she was teaching people about the human identity. She was teaching people about life. And it was very inspiring to be able to get a chance to look at the works with her working with people on the African American spirituals, and that you just can't go out there and just sing. You have to actually have it in your heart, in your soul. It has to embody you. And this lady was, quite remarkable, along with William Warfield, who she worked with. And there's a book, very powerful book about her life. It's called The Memoirs of Sylvia Oden Lee, premier African American classical vocal coach. Who is Sylvia?
That's a good title.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and the first, I'll just say, here we are. the preface to the book is actually given by William Warfield, who is also another great vocal coach and singer who we worked with in the organization for many years before he passed away too. And anyway, she, during this, I'll just say quickly here before we get to Joel, he speaks in the preface, he speaks of Sylvia and he says, over and above her being an absolute authority of opera, Sylvia has a wonderfully unique way of teaching and making people respond to opera arias. She is a well-grounded musician and a great piano teacher who over the years has committed to the memory of the entire regular opera repertoire. If somebody asked her about an aria, she will sit down and play the accompaniment from memory in any key. This is how powerful this lady was. Sylvia has so thoroughly mastered this craft that she doesn't even have to think about it anymore and is free to concentrate on her thinking. He goes on to say, because she is so knowledgeable and experienced in opera, chansons, and lieder, her ear will immediately detect what needs to be done, and she can go right to that point and help the person with it. She always has a special ability of instantly relating to people. Sylvia is completely genuine. She says that she says what she means what she says, and she is sincerely interested in helping people. And so I just wanted to read that short part to just give you a sense of, I'm bringing this up because right now people are thoroughly confused about where we're at in the world right now. And they should be very optimistic if they have an identity in beauty, in the beauty of every single human being, to be creative, to actually organize around a concept of a future based on man's identity in the universe. And so this gets me to, I want to just bring Joel up because this gets to that very question that what Joel's going to talk about is it's not just a question of fusion power, but the fusion power as a way to ignite and spark the advancement of mankind. That's what we're talking about today. And so I want him to come up and discuss that because there are some extraordinary developments that are going on, and hopefully you'll take what he's saying from the standpoint of this higher conception, that not, okay, we're talking about science and fusion power and oh, that's nice, I'm a little bit interested in it. But if we don't really understand that what we need to do right now is make a total scientific breakthrough for mankind. And there's new developments taking place in terms of the research that really goes, I would say, takes this American-Chinese cooperation for the New Silk Road to the next leap. That's what the fusion power, that's what cooperation in space would actually do. Because we're not just talking about getting the Chinese to come over here and build our railway systems and rebuild some dams and ports for us and go home. We're talking about now we have to say, what's the next mission of cooperation for mankind? And it's space cooperation, and space cooperation driven by the development of fusion power as the key source for increasing the energy of mankind. So with that, I will leave it there and let Joel comment. Thank you.
Yeah, they got it. Okay, so a few weeks ago, we had a conference call
Hold on, Joe, I'm taking this marker, sorry. I don't know who put that up there, but that's a permanent marker. I
Well, this
just
should be
realized what that was. Let's see if this is right.
If it's on the internet, it's perfect.
Yeah.
We had a conference call on the Space Silk Road with Megan and Ben and Marcia Freeman and Chad West, and from here, beside myself, and Keisha and my car went through some of the latest developments on how to get to low Earth orbit. And Brian Lance went through some of the developments on the nuclear thermal rockets, fission-based rockets, which would be useful to go between low Earth orbit and the moon. And after that, Keisha sent me a link to a very interesting article on a new fusion rocket design concept that would be about the size of a refrigerator. And Megan sent me a similar article. And so I called up the head of the program, and he recently sent me the proposal that they wrote up a few years ago on a manned mission to Mars using what they call a direct fusion drive rocket. And this would be a trip of something like 300 days, 310 days. So I read through the proposal, and I want to go through that a little bit. But before that, I'm sure you all remember that Curiosity, which is still functioning on Mars, left Earth orbit in November of 2011. And using a chemical rocket, it landed on Mars in August 5th of 2011. So it took 9 months to get from Earth to Mars. 9 months. And during its voyage, they had sensors to measure the amount of cosmic radiation that would hit a traveler traveling between Earth and Mars for 9 months. And it turned out it would be something like the equivalent of 1 CT scan a week for a whole year. You combine that with the low gravity atrophy of your muscles, being in microgravity for months. And if you were to send a crew to Mars using chemical rockets, you would end up with probably a dead crew before even they got to Mars orbit. And by the time they got to Mars orbit, they certainly wouldn't be very functional. So the design concept of this direct fusion drive, the thing that piqued my interest is not only was it using a compact magnetic confinement, but it was also using deuterium and helium-3 as its fuel. Now, before I show the first figure, why fusion? Why not use chemical rockets? Why not why not use nuclear thermal rockets where you have the fission core heating a gas and using that gas as your propellant? Well, let me go through a little bit. The most efficient chemical rocket that we have uses hydrogen gas combined with oxygen, H2O2, to get H2O. And in this reaction, it releases about 8 electron volts. This is a unit of energy. fusion, which is what happens in the sun. And we've already achieved fusion on Earth, which is called the H-bomb. But what we're seeking is control fusion, so you can control the release, so that if you use an isotope of hydrogen called deuterium, where instead of just one proton, it has one proton and one neutron, and use an isotope of helium, where normal helium is helium-4, where you have 2 protons and 2 neutrons. And when you fuse that, now to fuse this, you have to have high temperatures, you have to have a certain density of what's called a plasma, and we'll go through that a little bit. And you have to have enough time for these conditions so that you can have these elements fused, creating a new element, is helium-4 plus a proton. Now, the energy release of this fusion reaction, called the D3He, or deuterium helium-3 reaction, is 18 million electron volts. So basically the same elements. You have an isotope of hydrogen or a molecule of hydrogen. You have an isotope of helium or a molecule of oxygen. But the fusion process releases over 1 million times more energy. This is in electron volts. 1 million times more energy than any chemical reaction. And this is true for combustion. It's also true for batteries, even GPS.
Come up, walk forward, walk forward.
Okay, now I got it.
And it's not that chair doesn't.
I can't get too far from the podium here. All right, now I want to go through the concept of this. This group is based around the developments in Princeton. The Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory has been working on fusion for decades. And they've had some setbacks in funding, but this group is using this concept of magnetic confinement of the plasma to get fusion. So first, let's show the first figure.
Yeah, let's erase forward.
Oh, is that helium-3 getting in the way?
Yeah. Kind of the way.
I should have said.
Never mind, I got
said
it. Sorry.
Okay, you better remember that reaction. There'll be a test afterwards.
All right. Yes.
All right, so you have to read the caption, but this is the concept. Is the Orion on the left?
It's on the right.
On the right. So the idea is that you would use the NASA's Space Launch Vehicle, Space Launch System, with the Orion capsule holding the crew, and you would launch it to what's called a deep space habitat, which would travel between Earth orbit and Mars orbit. And the engine, which is on the left, right? Is it
Right.
left? Make sure I'm right. Now, this concept, it consists of 6 of these direct fusion drive rocket motors. So you would launch the space habitat of the Space Launch System, which is about the lift capacity of the Saturn V. If you remember the Saturn V from the Apollo days, it could lift to Earth, low Earth orbit, about 100 metric tons of payload, which is the capsule, the landers, all the equipment, and the crew. So what you would do is you would launch that deep space habitat and the fusion motors, and after everything was tested out, you would launch the crew, and they would use the fusion drive to leave Earth orbit and to head to Mars. Now, to get to low Earth orbit, you have to reach a speed of 17,500 miles an hour. So if you use your app and locate the space station, and you can actually see it at night coming over, it's traveling at 17,500 miles an hour to stay in orbit. Now, to leave Earth orbit, you have to reach a speed of 25,000 miles an hour so that you could escape Earth's orbit, either go to the moon or go to Mars or go to Pluto. Now, the fascinating thing about this direct fusion drive, and if you could show the second figure, you could choose. Okay, he's up there.
Yeah.
All right. Now, is the exhaust on the right or left?
On the right.
On the right. Okay. So what they are using with this, they're using this thing called the Princeton field reverse configuration to confine the plasma. Now, plasma, just to review, when you have a gas like we have in this room, and I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about just regular gas, that at high temperatures, the electrons orbiting either the hydrogen or oxygen would be stripped away. So you would have ions and electrons separated from each other. And that's called a high temperature plasma. Now, in this direct fusion drive system, they're using, like I mentioned, they're using deuterium, which is a heavy isotope of hydrogen. And they have tanks of liquid helium, liquid deuterium, and liquid helium-3, which they inject into the chamber. Now, in this, you may have seen these huge magnetic confinement systems that use a tokamak, which is a donut-shaped or torus-shaped vessel that has magnets going around the circumference and around the colloidal, called magnets. And when the magnets are in operation, they will confine the plasma. Now, to obtain fusion, the plasma has to reach temperatures of close to 100 million degrees centigrade. So you can imagine if you had 100 million degree plasma hitting the side of any vessel, any metal, it would vaporize that metal. So the way you contain it is with magnetic fields. Now, in this system, instead of having a torus, a huge torus, they use basically a cylinder with high temperature magnets to create the magnetic field. Once they inject the deuterium and the helium gases, they ionize them with a radio frequency in the megahertz range, a radio frequency that will heat up the gases, heat up the deuterium and helium to the high temperatures to create a plasma. The plasma, because it's has ions and electrons, will create an electric field, which will then create a reversal of the magnetic field, which will then provide the containment so that you can have the plasma contained within about a 2 feet diameter inside that tube. So the dimensions, I don't know if they're up there. Are they up there?
No.
It's 2 feet wide and about not 2 meters wide and 10 meters long. That's the dimensions of the rocket. Now, once you ionize the gas and you heat it, then you heat it to high enough temperatures where you can achieve fusion. What this will do, because the reaction products, once you achieve fusion, the reaction products, helium-4 and the proton, are positively charged. So they can be manipulated using magnetic fields in what's called a magnetic nozzle. At the end, can you see the magnetic nozzle?
Yeah.
So that if you look at the space shuttle when it launches, you see the nozzles directing the propeller. You can actually see the swivel of the nozzles. Well, if you were to use a regular nozzle with high temperature plasmas, you would melt the nozzle. So you have to have the magnetic fields in the nozzle so you can direct the exhaust. And because of the high energy of a fusion reaction, whereas in a chemical reaction, the exhaust of the propellant is around a few kilometers, like maybe 10 kilometers a second. In a fusion reaction, you can get exhaust velocities of over 25,000 kilometers a second or even higher. Now, you can adjust that so that you could use an increase in thrust or increase in propellant velocity, so you can adjust how much thrust that you get from your engine. So that this motor, this drive, would not only produce the exhaust for the propellant, give you the thrust so that you can get to Mars, but it also generates electric power so that you can power the entire spacecraft for your mission to Mars. Now, go to the next one.
Well, this is the explanation. I'll just read this.
Okay, yeah.
Explanation of what we were looking at. The schematic of the DFD core. Deuterium gas introduced in the gas box is ionized there. This newly formed plasma flows to the right, scrape-off layer, where the electrons are heated as they pass over the FRC region. This gas
FRC is the field reverse configuration. It's the magnetic fields that are produced.
This gas feed process augments the mass flow and increases the thrust at the cost of reduced specific impulse. The white region is neutron shielding, predominantly for the coil. And I'll go that again. All right, then we'll go back onto the next.
Okay, one thing on the shielding, in another fusion reaction, which is typical for most experiments, they use, instead of helium-3, they use tritium. They use deuterium and tritium. Tritium being another isotope of hydrogen, whereas instead of just, it has one proton and two neutrons. And using deuterium and tritium produces almost as much energy as the helium. However, most of the energy is bled off by a neutral particle, the neutron, which cannot be controlled by magnetic fields. It's a neutral charge. And what happens is the neutrons will hit the sides of the engine and even hit the sides of the crew compartment. So you would have to provide enough shielding to protect the crew from these high energy neutrons. So yeah, did you finish that?
Yeah, so now we're on the device under assembly.
Okay, so this is what's called it's called the Princeton field reverse configuration. or BFRC2, I think. Is this 2? Yeah, this is 6. Now, they're already building this. They haven't achieved full fusion power yet. But this is under contract from NASA through what's called the NASA Innovative Advanced Concept Program, where they are looking to fund projects that could pay off in 10 to 100 years in the future. Now, when I talked to the director of this program, he says that they're ready for phase 3. But what they lack is funding. Now, for a measly $20 million, we're talking about a few cruise missiles. We're talking about 1/10 of an F-35 fighter would pay for the next phase. And they're projecting that once they prove that they can heat the plasma to high enough temperatures, have it dense enough, and have the confinement time long enough so that they can achieve fusion, then they could actually go ahead and use these engines for this demonstration flight to Mars. And if you go to the next figure.
Burning.
All right, so this is the test reactor being tested. Can you see any people? I forget if there are any people.
No, you can't see the people. You see a lot of light, though.
Well, even though a deuterium and helium reaction produces only positive charges, because you're using deuterium gas, it is possible to have deuterium reactions. So that even though 95% of the fusion products will be in the form of helium-4 or a proton, about 5% will still be high-energy neutrons and some tritium. So that you still need to have some shielding while the fusion process is going on. Now, you go on to, is this number 5? Figure 5?
This is figure 5 now.
All right. So the idea with this, once they get to phase 3 and phase 4, and there's a lot of testing that has to be done so that they can prove the concept of this field reverse configuration. And I was actually unfamiliar with this until a few weeks ago, this field reverse configuration. It turns out that concept goes back to the testing in Los Alamos, going back to the 90s. And it has been tested in various labs. A lab in Washington State, in Redmond, Washington, the U.S. Naval Laboratory in San Diego, and they have done some testing at the Air Force Research Lab in Dayton, Ohio. So there's a lot of research going on into these compact, even Lockheed Martin. Keisha sent me a link to an article on this. Lockheed Martin is working on a compact magnetic fusion reactor that would be about the size of a truck. So if they can divert some of their money from the F-35 program into the fusion, we can get there a lot quicker. So if you go to the figure 8.
Okay, we are.
Okay. Okay, so again, you have this idea that you put the Mars transfer vehicle, which consists of the deep space habitat where people will live, and there'll be a crew of either 4 or 6. It wasn't specified, but the deep space habitat is kind of like a movable space station. It has all of the exercise rooms, the laboratory places, and experimental compartments, so you could live in that habitat. So what the trip would consist of, if you go to the next one, 12,
Yeah.
so that once you launch the deep space habitat, the direct fusion drive rockets, and this would consist of 6 of those engines. And each engine, once the fusion occurs, produces 11.5 megawatts of power. So the whole assembly would have about 70 megawatts, which is the equivalent of the nuclear reactor. If you look at a like the USS Nimitz, the heavy nuclear-powered aircraft carriers have nuclear reactors that produce about 70 megawatts. So that's the equivalent power you have with this direct drive fusion system. So that once you have the crew on board, everything is tested out, they would have a burn to leave Earth orbit, a coasting period. So the travel time would be about 140 days. That's still a little long, but this is like the first step. Sort of like the Wright brothers. The first aircraft flew about 40 miles an hour. Now we go a little faster. But this is the first step. And so they would achieve escape velocity and continue to burn. It goes for a while, and then once they approach Mars, they have to turn the motors to brake. Because the idea is to orbit Mars, not to fly by. And so it would brake, and then it would achieve an orbital insertion, and they would actually stay in Mars orbit for about 30 days. And to come back to Earth, they would use the motors again, fire the motors, achieve escape velocity from Mars orbit, coast for a while, and then once they approach Earth, they again have to slow down and enter Earth's orbit. And at that point, then you would send another Orion capsule to bring the crew back, because you wouldn't come back with the deep space habitat. And something like this would be the equivalent of Apollo 8. If you remember, in December of 1968, the first time man left Earth's orbit was in December of 1968. And if you remember, when the crew in the Apollo 8 approached the moon, it was not known whether they would, you had to make precise calculation. And if you see the hidden figures movie, you see the difficulty in the calculations, because you have a moving moon, you have a moving capsule, you have the speed to be in orbit. So everything had to be worked out to the decimal point. And they went around the moon, and of course you can't hear the radio signals once they're behind the moon. And so there was a period of minutes where you didn't know whether they make it or they go to the sun or what. And then they came back, and you heard them go through Genesis on Christmas Eve. So that this Mars orbital mission would have the equivalent breakthrough. And at the end of the paper, he goes through, the director of this goes through how you could use these direct fusion drive rockets for not only going to Mars, but if you have asteroid coming in, you could use these fusion rockets to get to an asteroid and deflect an asteroid before it hits the Earth. It also goes through how if you have a robotic mission, you can send something like these direct fusion drive systems to Pluto. And he says that the recent Horizon mission to Pluto took 9 years to get to Pluto, and it didn't have enough fuel to brake. So it flew by Pluto in a matter of hours. And they had all these pictures. And they had such a low amount of power on board, even though it was powered by a plutonium radioisotope thermoelectric generator. It had only about 200 watts of power. So that once it took all the pictures and it started transmitting back to Earth, the transmission rate was about 1,000 bits per second. So I think they're still transmitting pictures from the horizon. So with this direct fusion drive, you would have not only more thrust, but you would have more electric power, something like 2 megawatts available for your radio and other systems. So that an equivalent mission to Pluto would take something like 4 years. And once you got there, you could slow down and actually orbit the planet. And your transmission rate would be in the megabit region. Much more data would be transmitted back to Earth. And you could actually have enough power so that you could land something on the planet. And you could beam energy to the lander with a laser system so that you could actually move around the planet, even though it's billions of miles away from Earth, where you can't use solar power or anything like that. So this proposal is sitting on somebody's in NASA's desk, and it was put together a few years ago. And I'm sure that once, and by the way, I did ask him if he knows of any work being done similar to this by the Chinese. He actually said, well, he can't talk to the Chinese because it's a NASA-funded program that it's illegal for somebody he works with to talk to, and he can't even talk to the Russians about this, even though if we want to go to the space station, the only way we get there is with Putin's okay.
I heard on CNN that they actually did talk, okay?
Putin and who talked?
Putin and NASA.
Oh, all right. So yeah, they're going to be accused of being collusion. So besides the money, what we need is more collusion.
As long as it's not collusion.
Collision, okay,
Yeah.
as long as it's not collision.
So Joel, but you're talking your emission and doesn't seem like it's decreasing the travel time that much.
No, this is round trip.
This round trip, the equivalent with a chemical rocket would be 3 years.
Oh, okay.
One way.
No, round trip.
A round trip.
Right. Because if you remember, Curiosity took 9 months, but that was get there and land. If it was to come back, you would have to time it so that you can't just come back anytime you feel like it. You have to have the orbital mechanics so that when Mars is in the right distance, then you can launch and you can get to Earth in 9 months. Otherwise, if Earth is on the other side of the sun and Mars is opposite, and it might take 5 years to get back.
So, I'm sorry, the picture you have on the screen now, a round trip mission to Mars takes only 310 days, including 30 days. That's using, you're saying today's?
No, that's using the fusion
The fusion,
directly.
that's what I thought, it's using the fusion. So that would be, so if you had said earlier, yeah, that one way would be 140 or whatever you said.
Yeah, about 140 days to Mars, and 30 days in orbit,
In orbit.
then 140 days back.
And you're saying, but you're saying, what, without fusion though, the chemical, how?
Chemical, it takes 3 years.
3 years, one way.
No. 9 months to the planet.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Then
okay, I got it.
you
now. I
have
was
to
thinking-
wait.
I got it.
Right. You have to wait for the position
Comes
right?
back around.
Right.
And then another 9 months, but that 9 month gap is not considered, unless you land and take off. If you land and do some experiments, then the planet is no longer in the right alignment. So you have to wait, say, 10 months before you can launch from Mars to get back to Earth.
This is a third of the time, what, less than 1 year for a round trip
Right.
versus 3 years, yeah.
3 years. Right.
Yeah.
And this is not the limit. Obviously, the more advanced rockets would, eventually you'd be able to have an acceleration of 1 Earth gravity, and you could possibly get to Mars in a matter of days. But we're not quite there yet.
And how about the communications with the people? Are you talking about a manned mission?
Yes.
And, okay, and so would it be communication all the way through? Like once they got to the orbit of Mars, could they still say, hey, we're here, everything's safe? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of scary, I mean, that long.
No, you see, the speed of light, communication through radio is the speed of light. It takes about 40 minutes, depending on where the planet is. It would take 40 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes, depending
They're
on the
not
distance.
direct. You couldn't live talk to someone, hey, you have
No,
to wait
it's-
40 minutes before you could hear someone on Earth say something to you.
Right.
Like your cell phone.
What was the delay? What was the delay to get the signal back when Curiosity landed? Because it was not.
I think it was something like 12 minutes. Because it was, what was it, 7 minutes of hell?
Yeah.
Because once it got to Mars orbit, and everything had to be pre-programmed, because they had to break through the Martian atmosphere. Now, the Martian atmosphere is about 1% of Earth's atmosphere. So you can't just use a parachute to do all the work. You have to slow down, use the parachute, and then they had to use the rockets. And then they set up this crane mechanism where they hovered above the landing site and lowered the lander. And it took something like 12 minutes for them to get the signals. Hey, okay, I landed. So no matter how far Mars is, there's always going to be a lag time. Yeah, I think that's the last thing.
Well, we just have one other one which shows the different places that it can go
Oh, yeah,
besides Mars.
why don't you put that one up?
Yeah. One other one that shows the size there. Space launch.
So,
Read it, I might.
yeah.
Yeah, it's tiny, I can't see.
All right, it says, well, you can go to Mars with it. You can take robotic missions to places like Jupiter and Pluto, as you just said, and you can go visit asteroids. You know, there are many. Direct fusion drive will open space to new avenues of exploration and rapid industrialization.
That's the key. Now, he also told me that all of these missions that are being planned to go to the moons, the icy moons of Jupiter, to look for life in these moons and oceans beneath the ice. And he said because of the power on this direct fusion drive, you can actually orbit one of these moons and then drill through with lasers to drill through the ice instead of lander to go into the ocean to see if there's life in there. So this would be the equivalent of going from the stellar plane to the jet plane. And there's even a proposal to use one of these to go to interstellar. That would take tens of 1,500 years to get
How long to get to Alpha Centauri?
Yeah, something like 70 years. But that's within the lifespan of a.
That's where I want to go.
But that would be in the future. First, have to get to Mars.
4 light years away is the next closest.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Are there very courageous people who are ready to take this mission to Mars if there was funding?
Oh, yeah. Well, you have people now
Yeah.
who are willing to go one way. I think Buzz Aldrin was one of them. But Elon Musk is about a one-way mission.
No, but there were millions of young people that wanted to be astronauts. So
Oh, yeah.
There's unprecedented numbers.
But what, I mean, it seems like, hell. I mean, you go there, what do you have there? I mean, why would you want to live in that?
Build it.
You build it, I don't know, how do you live on that?
Well, you see, once you have fusion power, you can build, you have carbon dioxide. You see, this would be 95% of the Martian atmosphere is carbon dioxide. So plants would love it. So you can start.
Global warming problem, though.
Right.
Al Gore is not going to be happy.
It makes you wonder. And most of that CO2 is not from the Curiosity. It was there before. So the idea is you would want to increase water vapor in the atmosphere. So this comes from Elon Musk. There's one idea that if you drop some H-bombs on the polar caps, you can start melting ice caps. The ice caps have both frozen carbon dioxide or dry ice and water, ice water. So there's water on Mars. And as Curiosity is shown, all the elements, basic elements are there. So you would have to begin to terraform the planet. But to do that, you need a massive amount of energy.
So, kind of, I mean, it'd be great if we could leapfrog, but in terms of getting to and actually developing things on Mars, obviously the stepping stone which we've developed is moved to develop these capabilities in terms of not just a new mission to the moon, but actually colonizing the moon along the lines of Kraft Erika was proposing back in the 60s, among others proposing. I just wanted to come back. I wanted to kind of insert nuclear rocket engines in here. And the thermal rocket engines, you mentioned that already. And that's something NASA believes, at least the people working on programs believe they can have operating within 10 years. They already have. We already developed the capabilities back in the 60s, 1950s and 60s through the NASA program. But I wanted to just ask if there's also, the Russians are working on their own nuclear rocket engines, and their electric propulsion, which is a lot less than the thermo in terms of, power delivered, at any moment in time. But they're also maneuverable as these are being developed. That is, you could, in the sense that, I guess you could say that the nozzles are manipulable, or whatever would be the equivalent of the nozzles. And so, and obviously that would increase the capabilities in terms of changing course, adapting to different courses. You're not just launching like a rocket, you're launching it, and basically once it's launched, it's just carried on a certain trajectory. But the Russians have been developing it from the standpoint of maneuverability. And I just, and so I wondered if there was anything that, in terms of your discussions on this fusion program with that fusion rocket engines, if that had come up if you had anything to say about that. But also, I'm just bringing up this question of nuclear rocket engines from the standpoint as a stepping stone to Mars, to the moon, and that being preparatory to then moving on to Mars. But anyway,
Yeah, well, the main rationale for these nuclear thermal rockets would be as a ferry system between Earth and the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the figure, but if you look at what Kraft Erica had proposed for the moon, his city on the moon would be a dome city with fusion power and all sorts of transport. He was talking about 500,000 people on the moon. So yeah, that would be a stepping stone. And I did mention to this guy that, because what they're using for the helium-3 now is actually, it comes from the decommissioned warheads. Because your H-bomb, your fusion bomb now has plutonium as a trigger, and it has tritium and deuterium. Now, tritium has a half-life of 12.3 years. And when it decays, it shoots out a beta, or an electron, from the nucleus, and it becomes helium-3. So that's where they're getting some of that helium-3. And I told them about, if you knew about the abundance of helium-3 on the moon. And I mentioned Harrison Smith and all that. He goes, oh yeah, as a matter of fact, we think of the Apollo astronauts who came back with rock samples are really the first helium-3 miners.
Okay.
Now, as far as I know, the Russians are working on these nuclear thermal rockets, and they're also working on these ion drives.
Right. Yeah, I call it electric drive, but anyway, ion drive.
Right, and that's what we use. We actually have used some to go to the asteroid belt. Is one. The Dawn mission is used an ion drive to go hop across various asteroids. Now, what it does is it uses, most of them use solar power for electricity. And they use the electricity to heat a gas, usually a xenon. And they heat the gas to a plasma so it's ionized. And then they use a magnetic nozzle to shoot a small amount of ions out the back. And it doesn't have a lot of thrust, but if you continually have propellant over days, you could achieve a pretty high velocity. And they've actually gone to the various asteroids in the asteroid, but it takes years because it doesn't have enough power to develop enough thrust, because it's limited by the solar power. Now, as far as fusion rockets, I don't know if the Russians are working on anything like that.
So they're working on, instead of solar, you would use nuclear to
Right.
power.
Yeah. The problem is the weight.
Yeah.
Because in the nuclear thermal rocket, you have the core is a regular fission core that heats up. And instead of just heating up water and using the water to create steam and run a turbine, you run a gas through the core, usually a hydrogen gas. And the gas heats up and you shoot it out back as your propellant. So you get more thrust, but because of the weight limitations, you have this very heavy core. So that's part of the limitation. But again, you would use something like that for a ferry system, go from Earth to the moon. Use the moon as your base to get the helium-3, so that you could use the helium-3 as your rocket to get to Mars and beyond.
And these compact nuclear power plants could be adapted. The same kind of elements could be used for compact nuclear power plants on the moon itself.
Right.
Until you can get fusion power plants up and running on the moon.
Right. The other thing with the use in space of these rockets, because there's a high vacuum space, normally with the tokamak, you have to empty all the air out of your chamber before you ionize the gas. So you have to create a vacuum first. But if you're already in space, you have your vacuum already. Very few particles. It's the same thing on the moon. You wouldn't need to have an artificial vacuum because you have it already.
So if it takes 310 days round trip to Mars with this thermonuclear fusion, so how long would it take to go to and from the moon, which we are now talking about?
Well, the moon, we can get there in 3 days just with chemical rockets. So it's,
Yeah,
that's
I'm
not
saying
a
if
lim-
we had thermonuclear fusion go to Mars, why we would then be using that to go back and forth to the moon, right?
yeah, but your limitation is not so much speed. Because if you escape the Earth, it's 25,000 miles an hour. Once you escape, if you go straight to the moon, you can get there in 10 hours. But the idea is you have to slow down once you escape. And also, you don't want to hit it. Because once you get to moon orbit, you're only 60 miles away from the surface. So that the limitation is not so much the speed.
The control, right?
You have to maneuver so that, you see, you have the moon is moving. If your spacecraft is moving, so you have, this is the ultimate football. I mean, you got to catch a moving object at the right angle so that you can get your orbit and not just fly by. So the moon is much easier to get to. And if you have a failure like Apollo 13, you can come back in a matter of days. The other advantage that was pointed out with this is that because you have 6 rockets, you have a redundancy, 6 engines. But even if you have a failure on the way to Mars, you can turn around and come back without waiting to go all the way around. If you saw the Martian movie, they had to go, they couldn't just come back. They had to go around Earth, around Mars, and then come back. They were using ion thrusters, but it wasn't nuclear.
Good.